Jill here with Sirius Telus Moon, and while we are caretaking for an episode, this is the fourth episode of Love is Not Profane, and in this one, I'm going to add my experience as holistic health practitioner, and there is a juicy story to tell. This one is going with a juicy story, um, and so. While I was going through the first and second course of aromatherapy, in the first course I was exposed to the story of a woman that, although she did not say wrong things, she did have like promises regarding, or she basically named the things that the oils treat. And she was in a divorce, and her husband or her ex-husband was causing a big mess. So um, that got me to really delay with my business because I knew that I took a break from academia due to being targeted for actually looking at the diseases caused by what I now know is the esoteric and practical practices of Epstein rings. Now, this juicy story is actually quite terrible. Um, and this was where I was taking a second course of aromatherapy. My instructor was really up leveling in life, and so was I. And she wanted me to be her TA. She began to buy, she bought a house by herself, and she was really kind of like pushing for good things. And I began to also kind of like think about housing solutions. Do I want to try and buy private, or do I want to apply for public housing? I chose to try and give a shot to a business so that I can not depend on being in public housing. And then that person basically purchases the house, takes a mortgage, opens apprenticeship, and I was going to the apprenticeship, but then she was very likely tortured. And I knew that she was channeling. I knew that the family must have had to do something with intelligence. And so during the last part of the course, she openly discussed the fact that she has alopecia, which basically has to do with hair. And she was trying to figure out why. Hair, astrologically speaking, is also Saturn and Mercury. Um, and she was going from her Saturn return to Saturn maturation. I think she was in her Saturn return. I was going to be in my Saturn maturation. She was in her Saturn return, and basically she was tortured, and I guess tortured until she would try to target me, the person she wanted as a TA. So during the last classes, suddenly, and it was about particular oil that was Rosalina, and she talked about people being modest, knowing their place, not being too big. And then there was also a ritual that involved that who I thought was my bestie. Neptune in Pisces was Neptune in Pisces, and they also they talked the story about a tree that makes kind of like a deal with another tree and says, "Hey, I will protect you, but you cannot grow too much." And this was basically an energy siphoning deal. Now, why were these people doing that? I don't know, but here is the issue, and that is that there was an attempt that was constantly calling that I received from healers and channelers to connect with my roots. And I did not know that there were people that were trying to be um, pretending to be our ancestors or pretending to be guiding angels. Um, Basically, what happened is that um, the hair is the lineage, and participating in rituals that try to interfere between the root chakra, the housing, and mind you, that person was actually trying to motivate people to buy a house and so on. So it 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 doesn't necessarily kind of like I don't think that they were initially malefic. They were just like up leveling in their life and trying to convince everyone else. And at that up level, they were tortured until if it's something worse than that, then it's something that would entail that they would probably have been undergone ritual abuse in childhood, and that was an onset of mind control. But um, both cases is still possible. And when people try to interfere with one's basis, with one's root chakra, with ancestry and lineage, or courses that are to do with the housing, the sexuality, or even confinement or imprisonment, which is Saturn, or debt related issues, trying to cause a person to be in debt. Um, this literally affects Saturn related things, and in the body, we might see it as hair, skin. And although that person was really glowing, losing a lot of excess weight, not, it's not about looks, but about actually going through, actually doing the inner work, and actually basically up leveling with their own housing and roots and so on. They got enmeshed with something probably due to torture that was undermining their foundations and was seeking to undermine my foundations. Um, and so it was visible through basically the hair. And by the way, what would be routes to correcting that? Um, Probably from their perspective, authentically telling their story as survivor of ritual abuse and raising awareness to the up leveling, to the connection between ritual abuse as wealth consolidation on natural resources and real estate and housing and the housing crisis, because they were seeing the concentration camps, they were seeing the things, they were trying to warn people, they were trying to shift the timelines. Um, and what is done is that which for example happened to me when I was trying to manifest, um, they would collapse the frequencies or attack the energy of the person or the chakras and so on. Um, and probably from their perspective, they would try to locate where it's coming from, um, and raising awareness. They tried to raise awareness where to channel from and so on, but there were some things that were not something. And it was around people and channelers because that was intervening between clear channeling and whether it's people working with spirit guides or the ancestors. Um, to basically try to take over the real estate in the area, and they had to disconnect people from their lineages. So that by the way, my thesis proposal, one of the main components was that if consciousness permeates in the body, it leaves a trace, and this is one fantastic example of the ethereal and the esoteric or the consciousness leaving a trace in the body. Um, and um, more ways that one can curate such things is also to tend to the things in the lineage. Like, for example, when I spoke about the Holocaust and my grandfather's family um, that may have had in puberty weddings or arranged marriages or any such thing that could affect basically the lineage so much so that it would be better to not have continuation for those practices. Of course, the Holocaust is not a good way to end things, but but to discontinue that took precedence over to continue that. Um, and if there are any such thing in the lineage, for example, later I would see her sister in Disney clothing, and that person did something actually really beautiful thing to incorporating astrology and natural fabrics and energy. And it seems like the entire lineage had connection to the natural, the natural fabrics, the natural herbs, um, um, merchants and traders, and also spiritual teachings. But it was distorted to mafia activity. I'm not saying mafia activity by their lineage, but definitely that affected their ability to do what they came to do. If you think about Rockefeller, he was patenting basically plants and finishing the holistic healing, which there were attempts to do also in Israel recently and in the world. I even heard the call to not consume invasive herbs, which is, I cannot even stress how permeating even the holistic healings it is. um, the notion that Halux Vagus is about people blaming people other than themselves for their destiny, where those people were literally energy siphoned and tortured in spirit and in matter, or even in the womb or in lineage, um, causing them chronic helplessness that would need to be addressed basically with dedication of a lot of time to correct, to go in one's path, to align with one's path, um, and to grow slow and steady. Here's why slow and steady, because it's the bones, it's Saturn. Saturn in Mars sign actually encourages us to um, strengthen the muscles around the alignment of the correct form of our bone structure. Um, um, later, that person was their energy, whether it was that person or that person was tortured and somebody impersonated their energy, because they did try to correct certain things with the lineage, particularly communication with my parents. Um, so it was visible that they're trying to correct, to remediate, but because there was some sort of intelligence affiliation, a lot of those things are connected with using help or using authentic help to receive information and to transmit information. Um, and and again, many things could be possible, but this is also um, showing us how those interferences were basically conducted by people that perhaps originally never intended to harm, um, or if they did, it definitely shows up in certain various conditions. And this is also why in cults like Opus Dei, people would curse themselves. In fact, in Netherlands, there is, I'm not going to repeat that, but there's an actual curse where a person asks the god to curse them. And it's a common thing. It's actually one of the first things I learned in Dutch. Um, my mama used to say that, and I'm like, don't. Also, you think about the English goddamn, and you think about the fact that the American settlers were basically incredibly religious, the Puritans. Um, and you think about the interchangeability of goddamn and God bless. My lexicon lessons. Um, and those things are connecting to the first episode that is still processing about the connection between bloodlines and the type of crimes they had to do and how those crimes have implications on things. And this is why it necessitated people cursing themselves as sort of agreeing to take upon the implications of doing certain acts, because it would manifest. But also when people call, let's say, medical conditions, Al-Qaeda, by the way, is protective from that, but it was also used to, and the Seven Sisters, the Pleiades and Al-Qaeda, were used to inflict harm. And these are, of course, things that are done by people um, that are in societies where they curse themselves, because when they inflict harm, they also inflict harm upon themselves and their lineage. Now, why upon themselves and their lineage? Because up until the lineage identifies and breaks the pattern, that can affect the lineage in the reason of, if the sons continue to eat unripe fruit, namely continue to be, pedophiles and so on, active pedophiles, of course, um, then their teeth will also rot. That doesn't mean that people that have rotten teeth are active pedos. Okay. No, because I heard so much about teeth in the last several years. People talking about Saturn is teeth, and if the teeth are not good, or teeth is wealth, and so on and so forth. And I'm like, all of that is true, and we need to holistically address that. If people think that, oh, bad teeth means that a person is a liar, they need to remember that people that were violated or that went through trauma had to keep it a secret and had to lie about. So often they would say wonderful things about their partner or about their ex or about their family, where, and then when they finally speak, people would find that in contrast with the beautifully painted picture. Um, so to say that, oh, bad teeth because they lied is very simplistic. um, as um, as we see that these people were basically survivalistically having to lie about what happened even to them. Now, of course, such episodes are triggering, and these are topics that are, um, yes, very prevalent in the societies, and they affect all fields. One of the things that I heard that this person, for example, saying was, "Oh my God, they want my profession too." I'm like, "Good morning." Um, we know that Pfizer was astrologer, or is astrologer, and the profession of holistic healing. I did not do touch therapy, but for the people that did, it was affiliated with Epstein, so there was always desire that they would do those things in affiliation with those things, so that they would collapse the frequency of the people that would come to heal. And that makes it, first of all, very difficult for the people within those societies to actually receive healing, but also for the people outside. Um, to the people that ordered an episode about the relation between bloodline inbreeding and mafia and diseases. You already know that I talk, right? We actually, um, yeah, because I was basically self-pampering Friday, where I began to think about that point, and I hear somebody in the background like very happy, and I'm like, you want me to do an episode? That's the episode that is processing. So, um, very known to those type of guys of healing is Scientology, but also the Epsteins and everything related. Um, and this is where they would offer healing as actually healing, but then they would people would have to people would basically be extorted, and healing professions are one of the things that really, this is where people lower the guard because it's for their health, and that causes a lot of things to permeate. I went through such quote unquote therapy twice, not once. And there were even things where in previous therapy were not really not really working, but when um, well, basically invested in healing myself, I found myself. I found the reason that the therapy didn't work was basically the reason that um, Epstein ring. Uh, and this is something that um, the entire collective soul of everyone want, wants to change that. Um, and then when those things begin to change, it's kind of like, well, that's people's 401k. Well, that's people's crime against humanity exposed. But it's also the mechanism of how people who conduct crime against humanity are manufactured, which is the beginning of the antidote to the fear of imprisonment of both the common people fearing concentration camps and the lodges fearing concentration camps and people fearing jail.